Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. Today we're exploring some chilling stories with a Soviet-era vibe straight from the Russian Creepypasta Forums. Before we get started, please take a second to subscribe to the channel. And after the video, don't forget to let me know in the comments if you liked these stories. Sit back, get comfortable, and enjoy. Unfortunately, I can't vouch for the truthfulness of this story or the complete reliability of the storyteller. My aunt isn't crazy, on the contrary, she's a very rational woman, but at the same time she is A. very religious, B. has lived through a great tragedy, the murder of her husband, and besides, the story I'm about to tell happened to her in her early childhood. Nevertheless, when I heard it, it struck me as incredibly creepy, so I decided to retell it. Aunt Lena is from the generation of post-war children. Her parents starved, froze, and endured all sorts of hardships, and as a result, the girl was born frail and sickly. And at the age of 5, she was given a more than unpleasant diagnosis: tuberculosis. In the 1950s, this disease was treatable, of course, but the process was very long, arduous, and frankly speaking, involved some rather barbaric methods in places. Just imagine it. A little kid is taken to a sanatorium where they will spend not a week, not a month, but the next 2 or 3 years. Naturally, given Soviet incomes and lifestyles, parents wouldn't be able to visit them from Moscow very often. Upon arrival at this sanatorium, the child is put to bed and strictly forbidden to get up, so that the infection wouldn't circulate too much through the blood and body. This was one of the main methods of treatment. Naturally, a little kid isn't going to obey. In that case, they were tied to the bed. That's what happened to Aunt Lena. She did, however, get lucky with her doctor. He turned out to be young, talented, and most importantly, genuinely compassionate. For the first 3 days, Aunt Lena, though what kind of aunt was she? Back then she was just Lenochka, cried almost non-stop. The doctor would come to her with flowers and candies like a gallant gentleman. Eventually, Lena calmed down a bit, but the nights were very hard for her, and not just because she missed her parents. When lights out was announced and it got dark, kids would start running down the corridor playing tag. Lenochka couldn't play with them because she was tied to her bed, but she would call them into her room. At first, the kids either didn't hear her or pretended not to. Then they started flat out teasing her. They'd stand in the doorway, calling her to come out to them, but wouldn't step inside themselves. Lena got offended and stopped calling out to them. Several times a night, the kids would suddenly fall silent and run away quickly. Lenochka could see a tall shadow moving swiftly down the corridor, presumably an orderly, but for the time being, she didn't rat the troublemakers out to him. And yet, eventually, her patience snapped. She got completely fed up and decided to tattle. When the orderly walked past her down the hall yet again, Lena called out to him and complained about the kids running in the corridors. The man stopped very abruptly. In the dark, Lenochka could only see a very vague silhouette, but she realized he was staring at her. Without uttering a single word, the orderly entered the room. It wasn't pitch black in there. A dim light was shining through the window, and the girl instantly realized this was no orderly. First of all, he wasn't dressed like medical staff. Secondly, he moved strangely, as if taking rapid, mincing little steps. Thirdly, his arms were bent, and the strange man kept wiggling his fingers in front of his face, as if he were sorting through something invisible, and he was breathing very hoarsely. The strange man quickly minced his way toward Lena, and she got absolutely terrified. The closer the figure got, the less it looked like a human. Aunt Lena still can't clearly explain what it actually was. She squeezed her eyes shut because she couldn't run away due to the ropes. When it felt like the orderly was right on top of her, a child's voice rang out from the corridor. A boy was yelling some silly taunts like, "You can't catch me!" When Lenochka dared to crack her eyes open, the shadow was already back in the corridor, apparently chasing after the boy. The nighttime running in the corridors didn't stop after that, but needless to say, Lena never called out to the tall shadow again. She didn't even look toward the doorway. And then she saw another child in that sanatorium during the daytime for the very first time. And she was surprised to learn that up until that moment, she had been the only little patient in that wing of the sanatorium. Before her, there had been a group of kids, but some of them had been transferred to a wing with a more lenient regimen even before her arrival, and a few of the kids, unfortunately, had died. The disease had been too advanced. Thank God my aunt started to recover back then, and she was also transferred to the wing where they were allowed to walk and play. They had their own scary stories there, for example, about a half-ruined building nearby. It had been built but never finished by German POWs. Apparently, some of them had even died during construction, and it was said that the souls of the dead still lived in the building. Aunt Lena earned a reputation as the bravest girl in the wing because she ran around those ruins without any fear whatsoever. She, after all, knew where the sanatorium was truly scary. In March 2003, I was appraising the assets of a private company being liquidated on the premises of the Nizhny Tagil Metallurgical Combine. This company, Tagilavtoremont LLC, was engaged in the repair of freight and special vehicles, and had a pile of fixed assets on its balance sheet, including real estate and transport units for various purposes. To assess the technical condition of the latter, I enlisted the help of an extremely experienced auto mechanic, Sergei Ivanovich. He was a solid guy all around, a non-drinker, responsible, and most importantly, a knowledgeable techie to the bone. At the time, he was in his early 50s. In agreement with the client, the inspection day was scheduled for the weekend. It was more convenient for me. I could come from another city without having to skip my day job. Plus, there was less of a crowd at the plant. The company's property subject to appraisal was located on the territory of the Combine, about a 40-minute walk from the Komsomolskaya checkpoint. At that time, unlike the reckless 90s, they didn't just let private cars through the checkpoint for no reason, but instead of winding around the workshops outside, you could walk straight to the site through the old factory tunnel. This cut the travel time in half. The main thing was not to miss the right exit back to the light of day. For someone unaccustomed to it, getting lost in that tunnel was a piece of cake. The old tunnel was a narrow passage with unpainted walls and deep puddles on the floor, plunged into eternal gloom. Whether due to yet another economic crisis or the negligence of the maintenance staff, the dim light bulbs flickered at a distance of about 160 feet from each other, and sometimes even further apart. In some places, it was genuinely better to walk with a flashlight, or to better suit the atmosphere, a torch. Since Sergei Ivanovich and I were coming from different parts of the city, we agreed to meet directly at Tagilavtoremont itself. We were given a theoretical explanation of the rough route. I got there without any major issues. Granted, I only hit the right turn to the stairs leading out of the dungeon on my second or third try. On site, along with the client's representative, I started my part of the duties without waiting for Ivanovich, the technical inspection of the real estate, just so as not to waste time. An hour flew by, then another. I was almost done with my tasks, and the auto mechanic was still nowhere to be seen. Where had he vanished to? It was completely unlike him. The guy was as punctual as a German, and here he was, terribly late. Could something have happened? We had just spoken on the landline that morning. Cell phones weren't universally owned back then. Sergei Ivanovich didn't have one either, so there was nowhere to call to find out what the problem was. All I could do was sit and wait. The job was important and urgent, but luckily the mechanic soon showed up. He came running in all flustered and, I'd say, entirely lost. But there was no time for talking. The delay was already excessive. We immediately set to inspecting and examining the numerous pieces of equipment. Only after finishing all the necessary manipulations and procedures did we sit down in the office to have some tea for the road. Here, in a relaxed setting, Sergei Ivanovich explained the reasons for his lengthy absence. He had arrived at the checkpoint an hour before the scheduled meeting, with time to spare so he could casually walk over to Tagilavtoremont. He went down into the tunnel, just like I did, but unfortunately for him, in the dark and being unfamiliar with the place, he took the wrong turn. This branch of the corridor was completely unlit. The mechanic walked blindly for a while, bumping into walls until he stumbled upon iron steps leading up. Well, thank God. The climb up was just bizarrely long, but eventually, light began to dawn from above, and then a rickety wooden door appeared. Ivanovich pushed the spring-loaded door and, was almost blinded by bright sunlight. How was that possible on a dank, gloomy March day? After all, when he descended into the factory tunnel, the Tagal sky was tightly overcast with leaden clouds and the ever-present gray-yellow smog. Plus, thick snow lay everywhere. But here, the sun was shining like it was summer. There wasn't a snowflake on the ground, and even green grass was sprouting, and it was warm, like in May. On top of that, upbeat music was playing from somewhere. In the distance, workers were hurrying about their business in small groups. It was even weird. It was supposed to be Sunday. Where did all these people at the factory come from? Squinting against the sunlight after the dark, the auto mechanic took a few steps and looked around. To the left, about 330 feet away, the workshop cafeteria was steaming. Stretched over the entrance was a banner. "Let's fulfill the 7-year plan ahead of schedule." In the distance, on the roof of a production building, huge welded metal letters proudly proclaimed, "Glory to the working man." To the right, not far from Ivanovich, a small antediluvian crawler tractor was leveling some sort of site. Not knowing which way to go next, and really not wanting to go back down into the gloom, the mechanic approached the tractor driver to ask for directions. The driver stopped his clattering machine and jumped to the ground. A young guy, dressed lightly, unlike Ivanovich in his warm jacket and winter knit hat. Looking the approaching man up and down in surprise, he asked, "What do you need, Pops? Could you tell me how to get to Tegilov-Torimont?" The guy thought for a minute, then said, "Maybe you mean the auto shop? Everything's there, autos and repairs, but you should have come in through the main checkpoint for that, man." No matter how much Sergei Ivanovich tried to explain to the young tractor driver that he didn't need the auto shop, but the company, Tegilov-Torimont LLC, which was located somewhere nearby, the guy just wasn't getting it, and he kept eyeing the mechanic with increasing suspicion. At that moment, luckily, 2 men walked by, looking like foremen or section supervisors. Ivanovich approached them with his request. At first, they didn't understand what he was talking about either, but then one of them guessed, "You probably need the repair and construction department. I'll draw you a map right now so you don't get lost." Pulling a wide notepad and a pencil from his pocket, he immediately sketched a route through the tunnel. He tore the page out and handed it over, saying, "Here, go exactly as I drew it, and turn at the exit in the 3rd passage." Sergei Ivanovich, even though he felt they still hadn't understood each other, took the paper, thanked him, and trudged back to the entrance of the gloomy factory tunnel. As he opened the door, he looked back. All 3 workers were standing in the same spot, watching him walk away with a look of sympathy. "They definitely think I'm crazy," the mechanic thought, and without further hesitation began descending the iron steps into the cold, damp darkness. To his joy, he found the right exit from the dungeon fairly quickly, but upon stepping out onto the surface, he was shocked once again. There was the freezing wind, low black clouds, and snow all around. No hint of a warm spell, let alone the bright sun and green grass that had delighted his eyes barely half an hour ago. The client and I had a good laugh over his story. "You wandered into the past or a parallel universe through that fucking tunnel, Ivanovich." The mechanic joked and smiled too, but somewhat weakly and unsteadily. It was obvious the guy was seriously bewildered. We headed back to the checkpoint together, through the very same dimly lit factory tunnel. The whole way, Ivanovich tried to find and show me the turnoff that had led him out into the sunlight that morning. We even went up to the surface a couple of times through similar exits, but none of them were the right one, and so we reached the checkpoint empty-handed. As we were saying our goodbyes, Sergei Ivanovich pulled his hand out of his jacket pocket to shake mine, and that's when I saw a piece of paper fall out onto the snow. "Ivanovich, don't lose your document." He bent down, picked up the paper, and unfolded it. "Here it is, the route that weird foreman drew for me." I took the scrap of paper, a checkered notepad sheet. On it, arrows and circles were scribbled in pencil, but that's not what caught my eye. At the top header, in crisp typographic print, it read, "To the Nizhny Tagil Order of the Red Banner of Labor Metallurgical Combine, 25 years. When I got home, I opened an encyclopedia. The year the Combine was founded was 1940. Hello, dear readers. I want to share an old urban legend with you. The events I am about to describe might seem incredible. However, the world is full of surprises and one must be ready for anything. In the mid-90s, the infamous turbulent 90s, a quiet provincial town not far from the center was swept by alarming news. A serial killer had appeared in the city. He went on his brutal hunts at night when most townsfolk were already asleep, and the courtyards were roamed only by stray dogs that had survived the cold and hungry life. The killer's victims were young girls and women who found themselves alone on the streets at late hours. It might seem to some that there was nothing surprising about the emergence of yet another psychopathic killer. An era of lawlessness, banditry, and cruelty dictates its own rules, and after sunset, the triumph of life ceased to shine as a guiding star for Russian citizens. But this killer turned out to be a mystery both to the terrified townsfolk and to the detectives hot on his trail. There was one small detail that set him apart from the hundreds of serial killers flooding the cities of the former USSR. All the murdered women had lacerations near the carotid artery. Moreover, the general nature of the fatal wounds indicated that the killer first strangled his victims and then inflicted the tearing injuries. Thanks to this signature, he received the unofficial nickname the Vampire from law enforcement. Despite the fact that the police and prosecutors, aiming to prevent panic, tried in every possible way to keep a veil of secrecy over certain details of the investigated crimes, the pesky press ensured everyone learned about the maniac's habits. The public, superstitious by nature and ready to buy into any sensational story tossed out by the papers, firmly believed that a real ghoul had appeared in the city. To the townsfolk, this also explained the criminal's elusiveness. They said he couldn't be caught because he wasn't human, but a supernatural undead creature. When all methods of catching the killer had been tried and, to everyone's regret, yielded no results, law enforcement officers decided on a desperate measure. The police found a suitable volunteer, a young female officer, a former athlete, who possessed a cool head and complete fearlessness toward the surrounding nightmare. She was given a crucial assignment. The young woman was to regularly walk the feral city streets at night, serving as bait for the rampant maniac. The officer fulfilled her duty with honor. After several nights during yet another patrol walk, the brave girl, a police officer hiding behind the guise of an insecure and fearful young woman, encountered a suspicious middle-aged man. The man followed her for a long time without showing any signs of aggression. Only when the girl fully realized that she was being closely watched and that nothing good would come of it, did the pursuer sense the apprehension of his potential victim and close the distance sharply. A narrow leather strap immediately began to tighten around the girl's slender neck. The officer realized she couldn't overpower the attacker's onslaught, but at the last moment she reached the panic button in her coat pocket and sent a signal to the duty squad. Fortunately, the backup didn't take long to arrive. The maniac was apprehended and the injured girl was sent to the hospital. During the investigation, the maniac confessed to all the crimes. The killer also had to reveal his terrible secret. He would bite through and sometimes slice his victims' necks and drink their blood. This might seem bizarre to all of us, but the defendant explained his bloody craving quite coherently. His mother had worked as the head of a blood transfusion station. Apparently, the woman was not entirely sound of mind, as she believed that the best vitamin for her child's development would be human blood. She would bring blood from work and later began to feed her son with her own blood. When access to hospital blood dried up and his mother grew too old, the young vampire switched to the blood of stray animals. But one day he wanted to taste human blood again. The killer admitted his guilt, yet even in court he did not abandon his belief in the health benefits of consuming fresh human blood. The maniac worked at the local housing maintenance office and was in good standing. No one could have ever suspected his savage nature. When the killer was finally exposed and sent off to serve a life sentence in the far northern regions, the city breathed a sigh of relief. By the way, the officer whose actions led to the capture of the ghoul recovered. According to one version of the rumors, she left the police force. According to others, she still works there to this day. And that is the story. So those are the stories, guys. What did you think? Let me know what you liked and what you didn't. Make sure to drop a comment with your thoughts on the stories and the video overall. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed it, leave a like and subscribe to the channel. Also, be sure to check out my other videos. That's it from me for now. Bye.